stress, loneliness, social isolation, all this crazy stuff that's happening in our world. Now that we're working from home, we've got this pandemic going on. It's certainly novel, certainly weird, racial injustice, politics. Oh my gosh, so much stuff. Well, today we get to talk to two brilliant people. We're going to share some thoughts on that. Today we get to talk with Michael and Katie Stallard. Really excited. Their new book is Connection Culture. It's the second edition. I met Michael when the first edition was coming out, what feels like 50 years ago, but really wasn't. But it's been around that long. And now it's newly revised, newly enhanced, and even more relevant than ever. Michael, Katie, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate it. How are you?
We're
Good.
well.
Yeah.
Nice to see you,
Thanks,
Phil.
Phil. Hey, I like the wardrobe choice here. Good.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice when my guests get the memo that I don't send. So that's always appreciated. That's it.
Wardrobe connection. It was just happening.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. But you're both wearing glasses, so that's close enough.
Three of us. Another thing we have in common.
And we all like strong coffee. I know that.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I had mine today. So yeah.
Coffee. Okay. Pull up the coffee. Let's have a chat.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, let's talk about that, right? I think that little things like that certainly can make us even more connected. But I know that's not the real thrust of your book. So set up the book. What is the book all about? Why is connection culture so darn important?
Sure. Just to go back, I spent most of my career working in technology and then on Wall Street. And I noticed that mergers oftentimes didn't work well. In fact, 4 out of 5 mergers don't create economic value. So they're really a failure from an economic standpoint. And it was because the merged cultures were different and clashed that sabotaged their ability to execute the plan post-merger. And I became interested, Phil, in is there a best culture in terms of the workplace? I also had experienced times when I was energized at work and other times when I felt like the energy was draining out of me. And so I decided to take a sabbatical, and it ended up becoming a second career. We just did research, and it led us in a direction that wasn't on my radar screen, and that is the importance of connection. But all of the research we did really pointed in that direction.
Wow. That's so interesting. So I forgot that you're a big tech guy. I mean, I read your bio, and I'm like, oh, yeah. But now it really sticks with me, and that's so interesting because, I was a VP of IT for a long time as well. And it's so interesting because seldom do you talk to IT guys, or maybe seldom did I talk to IT guys that got connection. But now as we're really kind of neck deep in the war on talent and how to better lead our smart, creative technology folks, it's more important than ever. So, Michael, has this research changed as you've done the work the last 15 or 20 years? I mean, is it the same results? Different case studies, or what's different? What's the same?
Well, I would say directionally it's the same. And one of our early clients was the NASA Johnson Space Center, where we literally worked with the engineering section, which is the largest section there. It's rocket scientists and engineers, and of course my background was technology for years, and then moving to Wall Street over time. So since that time, we've worked with just a wide variety of organizations. We do a lot in healthcare with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Yale New Haven Health, Turner Construction. Texas Christian University has a center based on our work, so we partner with them in higher education. So we've learned a lot over almost 20 years since you and I first met. And we've factored that into our model. We have empirical research that really confirms that there are 3 types of cultures in workplaces: cultures that connect, cultures that control, and cultures that are indifferent to people. So we've learned a lot. We've gone deeper over time, but directionally we've stayed the same with the original finding, which is that connection really helps us thrive. And the research in neuroscience and other scientific fields really has affirmed that in the last 5 years. So our new book also shares that research and also the evolution of the research, and how more and more we're seeing that connection is absolutely necessary to help us thrive, even though our broader culture is becoming less connected.
That's interesting. Yeah, we definitely are less connected now. One of the questions that we got, or maybe statements here, is Kathy Close-Guest says, we don't always all experience that psychological safety equally, right? Women in people of color, for example, are not always heard. Their voice is not always included. And I think that's important, right, as we think about this connection. So how do we be more inclusive in that, Michael and Katie? How do we get more inclusive? And maybe if you have an example of how that's been done.
Yeah, it's, I'm glad Kathy asked that question, because that was a big thing for us in the second edition. We wanted to bring more examples of women and people of color. So, Lin-Manuel Miranda and the team that created the Broadway hit musical Hamilton, and Trisha Griffith, the CEO of Progressive, Oprah Winfrey, Steph Curry. We really added, it's a much more diverse book, and it reflects what we currently have in society today. And so that was very important for us. So an example that I could use, there are so many. I'm trying to think of one. Do you have one you want to?
Oh, well, actually, I was going a slightly different way with what Kathy had said. So this is interesting.
Go ahead.
I know from experience, Kathy, that feeling of being asked for my opinion, but feeling like it really wasn't what my supervisor wanted to hear. So there are times when, as a woman, our voice is, our opinion is asked for, but still you can tell that maybe the other person's already made up his mind and he's just asking as kind of a token thing. So part of our, when we talk about what you need in a connection culture, we talk about 3 core elements: vision and value and voice. And that voice piece especially is an important one, I think, to feel like someone really wants to hear what you have to offer and is coming from a place where every single person has something to bring to the table based on her life experiences, his background, that you need this rich marketplace of ideas if you're going to come to the best conclusions. So I think we have to be very mindful of making sure that the people around the table are very diverse, that there are women and people of color and men and age differences, and just we need to do life together. So Kathy, find an answer in there. Sorry, I was kind of going all over, but
no.
Back to Mike, who is going a completely different direction. But anyway, sorry,
No,
Phil.
Katie, I think that, no, don't be sorry. I think that's an important point. Before we get to Michael's point here, Katie, I think that's really important though, right? We have to be intentional about that. We have to be mindful. And I love what you said there. It's so darn important that we stress that diversity is not just a choice. It is actually something we have to do, right? We don't just say, hey, yeah, let's be diverse, right? Hey, yeah, Katie, oh, great point. Pat you on the head. Hey, good job, right? But really dive in and get deeper on that. So I love that point. Michael, go ahead with an example though, because I think that'll be a great way to drive that point home.
Well, one person that comes to mind is Alan Mulally. Fortune magazine has cited him as one of the top 3 leaders in the world. That's pretty impressive. And he's the CEO who saved the Ford Motor Company. When they were losing billions a year, he was brought in from Boeing commercial aircraft. And you really see that whole vision, value, voice. He went back to Henry Ford's original opening the highways for all humankind, and that by providing affordable transportation for people, it opens opportunities in their lives and allows them to connect with family and friends who are geographically dispersed, big thing today. And the thing about Alan is he's very humble. You see that he seeks the opinions and ideas of people and then considers them before he makes decisions. I remember I was presenting in Detroit to people from GM and Ford one time and other organizations in Detroit. And someone from Ford said, when Alan was CEO, we used to see him walking the halls and he was always stopping to talk to people. And he was just friendly and approachable. And you see that Alan really values people. Another thing that is along those lines of valuing people, Ford had a very internally competitive culture that brought them to the verge of bankruptcy. And it was kind of nasty at times. And one of the things Alan forbid was using humor at the expense of others. And it just became part of that culture where he really shut that down and talked to people privately about not doing that. We need to have a team culture where we're supporting each other, not taking pot shots at each other. So you really do see vision, value, voice in his whole story that we lay out in a case study in the book.
Excellent. Yeah, I know my friend Scott Monty used to work there. He was on the marketing team, the social team there, and certainly he speaks highly of Alan as well as a connector. And the things that Alan knew about people are just remarkable. So how do we get started on that? I mean, getting to know people here. Jennifer Lee makes a good point. She says that merging companies, or any company really, they take an inventory of everything except for their people. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know your people, you can't make connections. So how do we get to know our people more when we're busier and busier, when we're working from home, dispersed time zones, dispersed workforce? How do we do that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of it is training leaders, but really everyone in the culture to develop a connection mindset. So they understand that connection is, as we say, and we borrow this from Matthew Lieberman, the neuroscientist, that connection is a superpower. It makes us smarter, happier, and more productive. And disconnection is a super stressor that puts our body in a state of stress response so we don't feel well. And it often ends up in addictive behaviors or substances, and we're at a higher risk for anxiety, depression, and even suicide. So helping people understand that connection really is important. It's a must-have. You're going to dysfunction if you don't have sufficient connection in your life. And then helping people understand the attitudes, language, and behavior that connects people. And there are lots of them, as you would imagine. One attitude being assuming the best in people and not assuming the worst. A language is, I think, of Pfizer. Pfizer uses, like the CEO of Pfizer, when you hear him talk about employees, he uses the word colleagues. And that actually came out of their merger with Warner, or their acquisition of Warner Lambert years ago. They noticed that Warner Lambert people didn't use the word employees. They used the word our colleagues. And it's just a more egalitarian term. And then finally, behaviors, doing things like investing in training, mentoring, and coaching. Those things are behaviors that are connecting. And there are so many that we could talk. And that's what's been fascinating for us, is just to see in these, whether it's NASA or Turner Construction or Sloan Kettering Cancer Center or TCU, the University in Texas, that the ways vision, value, voice are expressed are different. They're connecting, but it's fascinating to see the differences in the way leaders really create cultures of connection.
So I was thinking, sorry, Phil.
Yeah.
What about
go ahead.
Ashley Hardin's her research about knowing the people you work with?
Right. Yeah. Good point. Katie brings up is Ashley Hardin at Washington University in St. Louis is a professor, and she's done some really interesting work that shows when we get to know people personally, more about their life outside of work, it has two effects. Number one, we're more likely to help each other. And second, we're less likely to socially undermine each other. So a lot of people will say, well, work is work and life outside of work is separate. But the research really is showing that we become more connected. We cooperate more. We help each other. We're less likely to undermine each other if we know more about each other as individuals and not just as coworkers.
That's really interesting. That we're less likely to undermine if we actually know people. I think, that almost smacks of, I'm if I actually know you and I care about you, I'm less likely to be passive aggressive in my responses. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of times I feel that's what happens is we snap because our default is often to be sarcastic or to be, in some cases maybe self-effacing or other effacing, right, to make ourselves feel better. But that's so interesting. I would not have thought that is a benefit of connection, but when you say it, it just makes so much sense. So was there other surprises here, Michael or Katie, that came out of your research instead of just things that just absolutely validated what you already knew?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Katie.
I was going to say the Julianne Holt-Lundstad.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm teeing you up to talk about it.
I'm the research nerd. You can tell.
He is. I'm the little details, the little details person.
Yeah. So Julianne Holt-Lundstad, who I had the pleasure of presenting with out in Utah at the largest school district out there. Julianne is an academic researcher at Brigham Young, and she made headlines worldwide. She had found in her research that she had aggregated, it's called a meta-analysis of research studies around the world on connection versus loneliness, social isolation, and living alone. And what she found was that people who were more connected had a 50% reduced risk of early death if they had greater connections. And those who were lonely meaning I feel alone, socially isolated, meaning I'm not around people at all. And then finally, living alone was a third risk. And she found that those individuals had a higher risk of early death than well-known risk factors like obesity or smoking 15 cigarettes a day, air pollution, other things, that loneliness actually had a much greater impact on our lifespan. So that was a real, and as we dug into the research and interacted with researchers at the National Institutes of Health and Stanford and other places, it really made sense. You could see what's going on. When people's bodies get stuck in a state of stress response, they don't feel well, and it drives them to addictive behaviors. So that has the effect of shortening our lifespans.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's one of the big research things that came forward between the first edition of the book and the second edition of the book. And I know it's gotten a fair amount of attention, that we are in this loneliness epidemic. And Cigna, the insurance company, has done research over the years using the UCLA loneliness index. And their findings from 2019, which are the most recent ones, show that 61% of American US adults, so 18 and over, self-reported as lonely. So when you think about it, that's 3 out of 5 adults, and this was before the pandemic, are lonely. So if they have a connection deficit, in a sense, and they are coming to work that way, they're just not going to be able to give their best or do their best. So it feels like in the past, there were plenty of leaders and managers that were like, work is work, get to your desk, do your job. I don't care if you have friends. Actually, I don't necessarily want you to have friends because I want you to stay at your desk and work, who separated the tasks from the relationships. Now we see in the science and research what feels intuitive to many of us, that the relationship part really is critical, really is important. The stronger and better your relationships are, whether they're shallow or really deep, the better you all are going to work together, the more collaborative, the more creative, the more innovative. So we shouldn't be downplaying or trying to compartmentalize the relationship side of work. It really needs to be a major part of what leaders and managers are thinking about. And, allowing for that time. It's not slacking off if you're standing, refilling your coffee cup and having a conversation with someone. That's actually going to help your relationships and make things work more smoothly.
Yeah, I think that's so important, right, Paul? Paul here makes a good point. He says, we're a profoundly social species and we struggle in impersonal workplace environments. I agree. And I can tell you that, when I started out in corporate America, 20 plus years ago, I didn't drink coffee and I wasn't connected to anybody that I worked with because all the conversation and all the connection happened around the coffee pot. And I learned quickly that was our opportunity to actually plug into each other, to give to each other, to understand what was happening beyond the work that helped us. But how do we, now that we're socially distant though, how do we plug back into this social culture, this connection culture that can help us be better when it's like, Michael, I'm sorry, I have to book time on your calendar to say hello. What's up with that? I mean, how do we do that as leaders and as employees?
Well, I think it starts with mindset. And just a couple things that are important for all of us to know, as I mentioned earlier, that we need connection to thrive and we have to be intentional about it. And now that so many of us are working remotely away from our colleagues, our need for connection is not going to be met primarily in the office relationships we have. And so we have to be intentional about connecting with family and friends, volunteering in our community. That's extremely important. Secondly, to be aware of those signs. I was talking to a neuroscientist at the NIH just a couple weeks ago, and he was telling me that, I'm feeling like, he was saying that he's more tired because he's working remotely, and he described it. He said, our brain senses that something's different and feels threatened by it. And so it's using more energy. We're processing more in the amygdala where we process threats, and we're using more energy because we're isolated. And so it's natural that we're going to feel more tired because of that. Our brain uses about 20 to 25% of our overall energy. So becoming aware of some of these things really helps us to understand that we need to take action. And then reaching out on using technologies like Zoom. And I know there's kind of a mixed views about Zoom.
Or any of these platforms.
Right. Yeah.
Not just Zoom, but
I
video
think,
conference.
So I think of Adam Grant has shared some things that he actually feels less comfortable in, and that video interactions like we're having here today are draining for him. So he'd rather do just audio. So it's going to depend on the individual. And I like the idea of just letting people choose what they prefer. I prefer video. I love to see people. But it's going to be a mix. But we need to be intentional about reaching out to our colleagues, and especially leaders, reaching out to connect with those they're responsible for leading, and making sure that those individuals, especially if they show signs of withdrawal, that they understand they have this need for connect. Now we have to do that, communicate that in sensitive ways. But it's helpful for all of your audience and all of us to know that this is a time when connection, because stress is higher, social isolation is higher, connection is even more important today. And we're seeing that rise in mental health issues and suicide right now because of lack of connection and high stress.
Yeah, Katie, hit me.
Oh, okay. Just, a little thing with what Mike had said about Adam Grant. It was an introvert versus extrovert thing. That introverts, it can be even more draining to have meeting after meeting after meeting on video, because it just takes so much to be trying to read the cues. Am I looking at me? Am I looking at Mike? Am I looking at Phil? And it's a lot of work to do things by camera and not be in person. I think we're probably all feeling that to an extent over these months. So, okay, just a little aside on that.
No, I think that's an important aside, right? And we want to look for others as if we're leading the team, or if we can be more flexible. I think it is important to be more flexible and to give people the option. I had thought erroneously that, hey, everybody loves video. Well, not everybody loves video.
Right.
That's okay. Or they'll put the video on in the background. I actually had a call this morning where someone was on video, but he wanted to show me his surroundings, not really focused on himself. So it was still like we were on the phone, but I get to see where he was, which actually, for me, I like to look at myself anyway. So that really works out good for me. No, I'm just kidding, right? But I mean, that's the thing, is we have to be intentional about that. We have to ask for preference and understand that some people are more introverted than others and do get drained by that. So maybe we can turn the cameras off. Maybe we can phone call, whatever it is that we need to do. So that's really, really good. So talk a little bit before we get to the wrap up stage here. Talk to us a little bit about the wonderful results that come as of this, because you had some great case studies in the book. You talked about TCU and you talked about Ford and the steel company and some of the others. So talk to me about some of the results and why the connection culture matters so darn much right now.
The results, you can break them into the personal benefits and the team and organizational benefits. And the personal benefits are we're smarter, happier, more productive, more resilient to cope with stress. There are a whole host of health benefits from having additional connection in your life, including, as I mentioned earlier, just longer lifespan. The team and organizational benefits can be broken down into people who have connection have a cognitive advantage. In other words, they think more clearly, they're more creative. Second, they align their behavior with organizational goals, which is strategic alignment is higher, in other words. They also, they communicate more because they care about the performance of the team when they feel connected. And so decision makers get the benefit of information they need to make the best decisions. We also see that there's more innovation in those cultures. People engage in creative conversations that help teams and organizations identify new ways of doing, new products, new processes, just ways to improve their performance. We also see higher agility and adaptability. They're just more flexible to pursue external opportunities or respond to external threats. And that's going to be important as the world is becoming faster. It's moving in a faster pace, and we're going to have to be more adaptable and agile to take advantage of those opportunities and protect ourselves from those threats. So those are just some of the benefits to organizations and to individuals, but it ends up being a huge performance and competitive advantage to have greater connection in one's life and to live in and cultivate a culture of connection.
Wow, that's really, really good. I really dig that. So we have an interesting point here that I like from Lydia, and it's going to take up a lot of our screen here, but she says it's having to be focused on the little camera lens, right, to make sure that you're paying attention and acknowledging them. And totally, Lydia, that is absolutely true, and I agree that does take a lot of energy. I think I try to offer more grace and understanding, right? I don't expect anybody's going to look, because if I'm just looking at the camera, I can't see you anyway. So we have to be more graceful there. I think that's a good way to do that. But what are some other ways as we're looking to get more connected here? Katie, I want to start with you. Okay. What are some ways as we're getting more connected that maybe you've even used to be more intentional about your connection culture?
Okay. All right. I had an idea in mind, and then you and then you kept saying.
And then I kept talking.
No. Okay. And I just want to say about Lydia, gosh, I know. I'm looking at people on the screen instead of looking up at the camera. So I'm still working on where am I supposed to be looking? I think in this time of the pandemic, to be able to honestly ask people and just be quiet and listen, how are you doing? To allow a little bit of that, more of that personal, that vulnerable into the conversation. It's just been such a crazy year for all of us in different ways. And I think we need to kind of walk with each other through some of these things. So to be able to whatever extent, back to that psychological safety term, to whatever extent you can be vulnerable and open to share just how you actually are doing. I think it helps to personalize, like we're in this together. Sorry, I'm not finishing my sentences very well today. So what have I done? What have we done to kind of up connection? Well, I think what other people have been doing, we've just been trying to make sure that we're having those conversations with our parents who are getting older, who live far away in different states. This would be a really great time for us to be able to go and be with them in person, but we can't. So making sure that we're having regular conversations, figuring out how to do FaceTime with them so that we can see them and kind of, sit in the kitchen at the kitchen table together and quote unquote, and be with them more. Have you thought of anything while I've been babbling?
Yeah, I think one thing I want to raise your audience's awareness of, we're going into a season where stress is probably going to go up. Stress has increased. It was high before the pandemic. It's become higher since the pandemic. And given we're going into the election,
we're in it.
We're getting close to the election. We are entering flu season, which could potentially pose some problems in a pandemic that could increase stress. There are other factors. We're seeing, more natural disasters, fires out west, hurricanes in the southwest. The southeast and the south. So stress is probably going to go up, and it's really important for us to take care of the people we're responsible for leading and who are important in our lives by having conversations. Because when we have conversations, it focuses the brain on the cortex where we make rational decisions. It also calms our nerves so we feel better. And that's really important. And it's shifting that brain activity from the amygdala where we process threats. So whenever we feel, never worry alone is great advice that I got from Ned Hallowell, who used to be at Harvard Medical School. And that's just important for all of us to remember going into this high stress season that we're in, and it's probably going to get higher. But ultimately, I'm optimistic. I think when we get through this, people are going to value connection more. And when we get through this difficult season, I think things could get much better.
I sure hope so. I think you're right, though, right? I'm optimistic like you both are. I think that's so important. It starts with conversations, which I love. Mm-hmm. I really love that. Helping others who are maybe not as technological, be a little bit more technological, to stay connected. I think that's great. My dad has a flip phone, but he's learned how to text. So, it makes me laugh, but, it takes my dad, what takes me 3 seconds to type back, I have to be more patient. I have to wait for him to respond. Mm-hmm. And I think it feels more conversational when I do that instead of just rapid fire information at him. So I think that's really good. And then be patient with ourselves to understand that this season is going to be really tough. So I really, really value that. All the good stuff you said today. If there was one other tip that you'd like to share as we're wrapping up here, Michael, I'm going to lead with you because Katie, I'm going to let you go second here. Or do you want to go first?
Oh no, I had something to say, and that is.
Oh, go.
I know. As I've been listening to us, the time has been flying by. So thank you, Phil, for that. But I feel like there are all sorts of things we just haven't even said. We haven't even gotten to. So my tip would be, read the book, and because we explain, this is what a culture. You may be working in a culture of control, and this is what that looks like, and this is how it makes you feel, and this is how it's bad for you on lots of levels and bad for the team. You might be working in a culture of indifference, what that looks like, stuff. Then the bulk of the book is what is a connection culture and what are those different aspects that you need and why it's important to you. And here's the science behind that. And then here's a whole chapter. I mean, all through the book, tips, big and small, about actions that you can take. Here's a very simple framework to kind of keep it in mind. Here are all these stories of people who are doing it in real life. And we know that stories are really powerful. And even though you may not be in that same person's shoes, there are little actions or words, attitudes that you can pick up and adapt to your own situation. So really would highly encourage someone to, dive into the book, and it's very reader friendly, very, it's a pretty fast read, and it will give you a lot of stuff to work with about, how to make connection really actionable in your life.
It's upbeat and inspiring. We think that's really important right now, is to see these great profiles of people like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who just is a really highly empathetic, loving individual. And it's miraculous what they've created with Hamilton, I think. Or Oprah Winfrey or Steph Curry, just really inspiring stories that I think we need right now.
Yeah, all sorts of stories, tons of stories. So that's fun. So, all right, that was what my tip would be. Yes, jam-packed food. Yes.
Yeah, no, I love that, right? Of course, right? That's a great tip. And your website has a free e-course as well, which I love, right? 5 minutes to getting started in that connection culture. But Michael, I'm going to leave you with the last word here. If there's something besides, of course, people need to buy the book. That's obvious, right?
Well,
but what's maybe one less obvious one?
One that comes to mind is, and a lot of your followers probably are aware of this, but it's called Helpers High. When we shift our attention to help others, when I serve Katie or our daughters or our clients, our friends like you, Phil, we benefit too, in this sense of the helper's high. It actually boosts our emotions from a positive emotional standpoint. So that's another thing to be thinking about too. Who can we call today? Who, I have a friend in mind that I'm trying to reach out to who is alone now and going through some difficult times in this environment. So I want to just reach out and check on him. We've traded calls, but I need to connect with him just to make sure he's okay. And I think if we're all thinking that way, more people are going to come out of the other side of this in much better shape.
I love that. That's so good, right? Focusing on the helper's high is great. I love thinking about who can I connect with today and then actually doing it.
There you
I
go.
think that's really, really important, right? Do the work. It's important. And then folks, get the book, right? I mean, really get the book, get a copy of Connection Culture. It's fantastic. It is easy to read. I love the first edition. I love the second one even more. It's really easy. It's at connectionculture.com. You get a 5-minute stuff. Yeah, lots of great stuff. Questions like, how do I help people beat burnout and stress? Where do I start improving engagement? How do I help people feel connected? All sorts of great stuff in the book and in the courses. Michael and Katie, I'm so grateful for both of you. Thank you for connecting with me today. It was just great to see you again.
Thanks
real
so much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for listening. Have an awesome day and get connected.
Okay.